Kia ora and welcome to How to Smash the Motherhood Penalty, the podcast where we get curious about a system where all parents pay some kind of a price, but it's only mothers that are paying a financial price. I'm your host, Emma McLean. I'm an executive coach and a mum of three. Join me as I interview experts in all different fields on what the motherhood penalty is, how it impacts us, and what we can do to smash it. Welcome back. It's your friend Emma. Today I am delighted to have, all the way from across the ditch, Georgie Dent. Georgie is a legend. She is someone that I have followed for a long time and is an inspiration to me in terms of being an advocate for caregivers, for parents, for children. And I'm just so delighted that she even considered coming on my podcast. Georgie, I'm going to let Georgie introduce herself, but I'm going to give her a little intro anyway. Georgie is the CEO of The Parenthood, Australia's leading parent advocacy organisation representing over 80,000 parents, carers and supporters. She's a best-selling author, former lawyer and prominent advocate for children, families, gender equity and mental health. The Parenthood champions paid parental leave, access to quality early childhood education and care and family-friendly workplaces. She's a mum of three and lives in Sydney with her husband and co-partner in chaos. I love that. I've read, you're a lawyer, and I just wondered, what's been your journey from, the legal profession into the many hats you wear now?
Yeah, so look, I started my professional life as a lawyer. I worked for one of the big law firms here in Sydney. I did their graduate program. And at the age of 24, I had a pretty significant nervous breakdown. So it was a combination for me. I had chronic illness, which I still have. So I had Crohn's disease. I also had quite terrible endometriosis. I also didn't know at the time that I had been living with really significant generalized anxiety. And all of that being sort of the anxiety not being treated, my chronic illnesses not being great, being in a stressful job, I literally just broke. So I spent 4 months. I moved back in with my mum and dad. My mum basically had to take off, she took carer's leave from her job and became my sort of full-time carer, which wasn't on the bingo card that her and dad had. They thought, I'm one of 3 kids. They thought we'd got them all through uni. Everyone's got a job, but unfortunately, I fell apart. And that was a terrible thing at the time, but ended up being a bit of a gift because it really was a wake-up call for me. I knew that, I learnt the hard way that without my health, my physical health and my mental health, literally nothing else was going to matter. And so I resigned from the law firm. I had been on unpaid leave for a long time by that point. I started taking medication for anxiety. I went to a psychiatric hospital for a couple of weeks for sort of rehab, which was really an incredibly beneficial experience for me. Challenging and sort of tricky, but really rewarding in that it was an opportunity for me to kind of look at what do I really want in my life. And at that point, all I really wanted was to feel better. I needed to get on top of my health, my mental health. So I took about a year out of kind of professional work. I did move back to Sydney. I was sort of working casually, just selling clothes in David Jones, which is one of the department stores here. And I was young enough that I didn't have sort of major responsibilities, so I could kind of just rebuild. And then when I was ready for professional work again, so about 12 months later, I actually applied for a job at a business magazine. So it's shut down now, but it was called Business Review Weekly. And it was attached to a couple of the big newspapers, so the Financial Review and the Sydney Morning Herald. It was all part of that stable. And I had done a communications degree as well as a law degree. I'd always been interested in journalism. And this job came up. It was for a researcher. It was only for 3 months. And I just thought that would be a great toe in the water, see what it's like to work around journalists. And for me, I just absolutely loved it. And I managed to meet the editor-in-chief and sort of explain to him that I was a qualified lawyer. I was kind of looking for a career pivot. And I went through the sort of motions. I was given an interview for a traineeship. And so I ended up working there as a junior reporter. And as a junior reporter, I became quite fascinated with the extent to which gender inequity still prevailed. So I had been fortunate enough, I went to an all-girls school that was sort of a very high achieving environment, girls that were really good at all sorts of things, academics, sport, public life, all of these things. And then when I went to uni, like a lot of people at my age, there were more girls in my cohort of law than there were men. When we were doing clerkships and graduate programs, women outnumbered men, not by a huge number, but there was definitely a disparity. And yet, when I was working as a junior reporter at this business magazine and I was interviewing all of these managing partners of big law firms, big accounting firms, I was looking at CEOs, in ASX listed companies, and the gap between men and women was so significant. And I was quite naive, having thought through my own experiences that we're on the path. Gender equity is just a matter of time. How mistaken I was.
Lucky it's all fixed now, by the way. But anyway, keep going with the story.
So I had this experience and I just became really fixated on reporting on the gap between men and women. And, this was sort of 17 years ago. And, it was definitely more of a niche subject than it is now. I would say it's much more mainstream, but back then it was a little bit niche and I just was quite fascinated by it. And then when my husband and we had our first baby, we were actually overseas when we had her. My husband was doing his master's overseas. We fell pregnant a lot faster than expected. I think I'd said I had Crohn's and endometriosis. It just wasn't, but we were very lucky. We had this little baby in the UK. And when we came back to Sydney, I had been offered my job at BRW back 4 days a week. And my husband was still a very junior. He was still a medical intern. So we don't have parents in Sydney or family in Sydney. We both needed to work, and we just assumed that it would be a matter of ringing up the local childcare service or daycare and finding a spot for our toddler. And of course, it was an absolute debacle. It took us 3 months to even get a spot for her. And then when we did get a spot for her, it was in the CBD of Sydney. And neither my husband or I worked in the CBD of Sydney. And it was back then, and so this is 14 years ago, it was $165 a day, 4 days a week. So we were spending more on her childcare than we were spending on rent at the time. And we were renting a pretty basic little apartment, but Sydney rent is expensive. And because the daycare, which was actually amazing, it was above the Apple store in Sydney in George Street. So it was in the heart of the CBD. There was nowhere that you could park. The only way to get in and out was on the bus with a pram with a toddler. And my husband and I would do that. And then we'd sort of go 20 minutes in the other direction to our respective places of work. And it just hit me. I was like, this is why the disparity between men and women in all realms of corporate public life, whether it's schools, hospitals, accounting firms, law firms, universities, it's all because we've got this crazy gap between men and women after they have a baby because our systems are just not set up to support families. It was so hard for us, and I say that noting that we have got so much privilege, both highly educated from very comfortable families. We both needed to work. There was no sort of option for one of us to not work. But looking at the numbers, you could really see why some couples might make that choice, that actually this is too hard and it just doesn't make any sense and it feels too expensive and the logistics are crazy. So that's a really long way of saying I pivoted from law into business journalism and just developed a really strong personal and professional obsession with why the gap between men and women persists. And then since then, the last 14 years, I continued in media for quite a while. I worked for a couple of different women's websites and we had a couple of more children. I stayed really focused on gender inequity. And because of that, I was really focused on paid parental leave, family-friendly workplaces, and access to early education and care. And because of that interest, and I was a journalist, so I was writing all the time, there was some visibility to that work. The Parenthood, which is a not-for-profit advocacy organisation, they were in connection with me because they would often pitch me stories about their campaigns, and they were set up really to campaign and give voice to parents. And they were particularly engaged on advocacy around paid parental leave and access to quality, affordable early education and care. And so I came to be involved with the organisation. I joined their board in the beginning of 2019. And then it was in 2020 when COVID hit that the board asked me, we didn't have a CEO at the time, and they asked me to step in and run a campaign. And shortly after that, I sort of was formally interviewed and became CEO. So I've been running the Parenthood for 5 and a bit years. We represent about 80,000 parents and carers. Our mission is to make Australia the best place in the world to be a parent and raise a child. And that is quite a bold ambition, but I also think Australia has been world leading in realms before. Why would we not seek to be world leading in the way we support parents and children in those formative years when the well-being of those children is quite literally all of our future? And so we specifically campaign on, we would like 1 year of paid parental leave at a replacement wage rate that's shared between parents where there are 2 parents. We would like every child to have access to high quality, inclusive early childhood education and care that's delivered by a professionally paid and qualified workforce. Now, I know that is a mouthful, but there is not a single word that you can take out of that policy ask and capture what we want, because we don't want poor quality childcare. We don't want childcare that's delivered by workers who are not properly qualified, who are not properly remunerated. We don't want early education care that's not affordable and accessible. Anyway, we want that for everyone. And then we want parents to have access to workplaces that value caregiving. So there are sort of big 3 policy asks. And I've done lots of things, but really I have spent the last 15 years either writing or talking or trying to persuade people about the importance of these policy settings, and also just the importance of parenting and the importance of actually needing support.
Well, I need to just give that a moment, because what a story. What policy asks you have, what powerful policy asks you have. You know, if we lived in a world where we did put children and then parents at the centre, what would our society look like? Would we have crime? Would we have violence? Do you know, I mean, I'm not wanting to be like silly, but it's true, right? Like, that's what you must believe, that this is the way you run a world, a society that we all thrive in.
Yeah. And look, I am so, you would be hard pressed to find a person of any political persuasion who would openly say they don't care about children. Saying we care about children is something that is so basic that everyone says it. But when you dig into what that actually means, that's where I think there's a huge gap. And one of the sort of things that I often say is the well-being of children, particularly small children in that 0 to 5 window, is inextricably linked with the well-being and capacity of their parents and caregivers. And so we just cannot say we are a country that invests in children and cares about children if we're not also investing in parents. And I think that sometimes here in Australia, there's definitely still, you will hear people say, well, you had children, you pay for them. If you wanted this, that's your lifestyle choice, without actually recognizing the need for, we've accepted things like education, public education, or public hospitals or roads. They're important for the collective good. And early education and care and paid parental leave are exactly the same. They are critical pieces of infrastructure that support children and parents when it matters most.
To toku that, which is te reo Māori for support that. I mean, like, childcare is infrastructure. Like, when I heard your story about starting your family and having a toddler and like, oh, right, well, we'll just get childcare, and like, oh, okay, there is none and it's really expensive and the only one is in the middle of the city. I on the podcast interviewed a Kiwi who's living in London called Rachel Carroll, and she started this business called Koru Kids, where she's trying to create innovative childcare solutions for exactly this reason, that childcare is not flexible,
Mhm.
convenient, or affordable. And she says, and her quote is something like, and it's not the right word, but she said the profanity of my clients having to move out of London in order to change their lives in order to get childcare is just, she's just think that's why she started this business, and she's in 10 cities in the UK now doing things like after school nannies, trained, quality,
Yeah.
reliable. Because I tell you what, people think that it gets better when your kids get to school, and it do you know what I mean?
Well, and
Like,
look, that irony has often been pointed out to me because, as I said at the beginning, my children are now, we are many, many years from having been in the early years, but I have remained fixated on improving these policy settings, even though I'm also living the reality of the other policy settings which make life really, really difficult for families, which is how on earth do you make school hours fit with a job? How do you make school holidays fit with, even if you're in the fortunate position like I am, where I've got permanent employment where I am afforded paid annual leave, you still can't make annual leave match school holidays. And it is this sort of constant logistical financial undertaking that parents are just constantly juggling.
for me, when you talk that back, Georgie, it's this constant, relentless additional mental load. It's the Jenga,
Yeah.
that how is this? And typically, and we'll talk about this in a minute, one parent carries that, and boy, that's heavy.
Yeah, it is. And it's also, I think what is exhausting is that you get through one set of school holidays and then you are confronted with another term of school. And so here in Australia, what that often means is there might be a different schedule of when it's library day, when it's sports day, there might be a different after school activity. You're just constantly pivoting and adjusting. And it's like, well, that was the Tuesday last term, but now it's different. Oh my gosh, there's new school holidays coming up in about 30 seconds. And no one gives you this sense of relief that we did it, because you get through one set and then you are confronted with another. And I
Mm.
think that it is a really big pain point for a lot of families. And the argument about these policies being infrastructure is even more sort of valid now because, I mean, here in Australia, and I'm sure it's similar in New Zealand, but when we've polled parents, so we polled 1,500 parents with children under 6 this time 2 years ago. So it was the end of 2023. And 94% of those parents said they need 2 incomes just to meet the cost of living. Sorry, no, 94% of those who lived in metropolitan areas. It was about 86% of the total pool that said they need 2 incomes just to meet the cost of living. Over the last, 5 to 10 years, the cost of housing in particular has just gone up so exponentially. It really is only the most privileged households who can afford to have one parent at home. It just isn't. And that's when you confront this reality that, okay, well, if in order for your household, for there to be food on the table, for there to be housing, some clothing, ideally some heating, all of your basic needs, we're going to have parents in the paid workforce. But if you've got small children and you're not in the position where you've got family who can step in, who are willing, able, financially comfortable enough to step in and take that on, you need some form of early education and care. And that is no longer a niche proposition. And that's why I think it's even more important now than ever that we actually characterize these policies as infrastructure, because it is just cruel to pretend to any household that somehow they should be able to do this, like provide for a family and raise a family without collapsing if there is no support around them.
It's such a good point because in my work, I think so many people see it as a personal failure.
And this is one of the things that I say all the time to parents with small children. It is not hard because you are doing it the wrong way. It is really hard. One, because it's hard. Raising little children, it is a really big undertaking. And that is also part of what I want our work at the Parenthood to do, is actually fully realize the value of parenting and what it takes. It is not something simple that happens behind closed doors. It is the most consequential endeavor you can undertake, and it is huge. What it requires in terms of resources, time, space, skills, patience, it's huge. And we pretend like it's this mystery that just happens behind closed doors. So there's part of my thing about it's hard because it's hard, but mostly for a lot of families with young children, it's really hard because the system is actively working against them. It's not their personal choices. It's not that they're somehow failing. And I relate to that because I gave the example of with our first baby, with our toddler, we had this childcare center in the city. We weren't working in the city. We went on to have 2 more children. And each time the logistics were wild. Like, we couldn't get both girls into the same service at the same days. And so we were, and then at one point we moved because we needed more room, and the only way we could afford more room was to move a long way away, but we couldn't get childcare. So for 7 months, I was literally driving from one side of the city to the other, 3 times a week in peak hour traffic with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I did think so much, what am I doing wrong? Why is it this hard? And the reality is, there were some parts of that period of life that would have been hard regardless. But one thing that would have been amazing was, like, when both of our girls got into the amazing local center that I could walk to, my life literally transformed.
Totally. I totally agree that it's not us, it's the system. And that's something I always say to the clients. And I also think the system, if you are partnered and if you are partnered in a heterosexual relationship, I think the system almost pits us against each other with all the different gendered beliefs that still exist in the system. So I just say to people, look, be kind to yourselves. This is hard because it is hard. And it's also a setup.
It is. And I think that's something that I have thought about before, and I have written about and spoken about this, that here in Australia, we are still very wedded to our stereotypical gender roles. Like, we love mum as caregiver, dad as breadwinner, even though that's not the world we live in, but those sort of stereotypes are so dominant. And what that means is that for a lot of couples that want to do it differently, they haven't necessarily grown up with a roadmap for that, but they're also still coming up against all of these subtle and not so subtle signals that somehow they're not doing it the right way. And, when we had our first daughter, who she's now 15 and a half, so that was obviously a while ago, my husband and I were, and I think we're very similar in this regard, we both felt when we took that tiny baby home, we both felt as unskilled and unprepared as each other. There wasn't this sort of that because I'm a female, I somehow intuitively knew what to do. We were literally learning on the job. And yet, anytime Nick was out with our baby in a pram or, in a carrier, he was basically met with like a ticker tape parade celebrating him. Whereas the classic scenario, people would be glaring at me because I might have been breastfeeding in public, or
your baby's crying,
baby was
or
crying.
something terrible.
We laughed about it, but we've also been like, this is actually a bit rubbish that even in this day and age, men and women, or mums and dads, are looked at so differently. And I think we undersell mums and dads in different ways, but the impact is the same in that it's really detrimental. And what it means is, for couples and families where they're trying to do it differently, again, the system is actively working against them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I work with couples who sit down and actively, intentionally talk about how they want their family to work and how it's all going to work. And then the dad gets into work and asks for it, and they go, "What? Don't you have a wife for that?" Literally.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so it's tricky. Question for you, Georgie. When I say the words motherhood penalty, what for you does that mean? Like, what does that word, the motherhood penalty, mean for you?
I think that for me, it means the unfair and systemic burden that mothers end up paying one way or another when they have a family. And I don't want that to sound, I mean, I'm conscious when I say that of how negative it sounds. Like, I think that we should have as a starting point that having a child is an incredible privilege. And there is so much joy and fun and delight that comes on with that journey and with that relationship. So that's not what I'm talking about with the motherhood penalty. What I'm talking about is the extent to which collectively mothers have been and are forced to pay a price for spending their lives doing the critically important, unpaid, undervalued care work that we all depend on. And so we had one of our former sex discrimination commissioners is a woman called Elizabeth Broderick. She's quite a globally renowned figure for the work that she has done in sort of combating gender equity. She was a lawyer before she became the federal sex discrimination commissioner. And I remember, she had this line, and she would use it fairly often, that too often the price that mothers pay for spending their lives caring is poverty. And it is the systemic financial insecurity that comes from becoming a mother that shouldn't have to be like that, but it is. And it's because when all of the system settings aren't right, someone inevitably has to step back from the paid workforce. And we know that 9 times out of 10, that has been the mother. And the impact is not just the stepping out of work for a period of time. It's the compound cost that comes with that. It's returning to work part-time and thinking the only way I can get a part-time job is if I take one that's 6 or 7 rungs below my seniority, but I'm so grateful because I just need a job and I'll take that. And then you're missing out on you're not necessarily fulfilling your full potential. You're just taking the bare minimum. And then you compound that over the course of a life. And for some women, some mothers, it's never been possible to get back into the workforce. And that has been okay until something has happened. So whether that is illness, whether it's a relationship breaking down, whether it is, your partner losing their job, all of these things that absolutely can and will happen, so often it is mothers who are left with no insurance policy, and they are the ones that have to carry this. And then that's why they are looking into their later years, thinking about financial insecurity, poverty, where am I going to live? How am I going to live? That's what I think about with the motherhood penalty.
I think that's powerful, and I want to acknowledge that the complexity of talking about this, because I heard you say I don't want to be negative about this because there's so much beauty that comes with being a mum and joy and privilege and the point of life kind of stuff. But at the same time, the system settings from a financial perspective penalize mums. And just the point about poverty, I have done a little bit of work about that as well. And in New Zealand, the fastest growing group of people in poverty are women over 60. And these are women that have never touched social welfare systems for their entire life. And then an event happens, death or divorce, and they have looked after everyone else. That's actually why I do this work, because that is wrong. That's just, do you know what I mean? Like, that's just wrong.
And it's similar here. I read something recently. I mean, so one of the biggest growing sort of cohort of people at risk of homelessness here in Australia, it is women aged over 55 for exactly these reasons. And it is the sort of structural factors that, and that's when I think it's just horrific, the injustice of these people who didn't have options and didn't have a system that was supporting them. And now they're being punished because it hasn't ultimately worked out in their favor, because it doesn't. And, there just is no way of achieving security and safety without financial security. For 99.9% of the population, the only way to attain any form of security and safety is consistent participation in paid work. And we have made that very difficult, or it is very difficult for mothers in particular. And then they pay a really significant price for that over the course of their lives.
Mm,
And it's not fair. And again, like I said, very few people would ever say anything other than, oh, children are so important. We love
yeah,
children. Similarly, people would say, oh, we all love our mums.
yeah.
Do we?
Well,
We love
I
mums
actually,
as a collective.
I know, and you're so right with this whole, well, children are important and mums are important. And I did an International Women's Day talk this year, and the CEO introduced me, and the way he introduced me was talking about how much he valued his mum. And again, look, I know this is good intentions, and I know this is great, but that's kind of the problem. Like, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like,
it's also, the point is that mothers taking on the vast majority of unpaid care work. So it's not just even children, but it's elderly parents, it's siblings with additional or complex health needs. So often it is mums who have absorbed this additional labor, and it has actually worked out really well for a lot of people to have that taken care of. For
totally.
individual, there are definitely men out there who have benefited from that directly, but also just employers, taxpayers, the government. Everybody has benefited extraordinarily from this work staying unpaid and unseen. And I don't doubt that, the average person out there does have a lot of respect and love, I hope, for their parents. But that isn't, like, love and hope doesn't pay the bills. And
It's not enough.
if we genuinely love someone, why would we deny them the dignity of financial security?
Yeah. Well, let's elect Georgie for Prime Minister now.
I
You know, when you
don't have time for that. I don't think that would work.
yeah, I don't have time for that. I'm not getting involved in that. But, when I hear you talk that back, Georgie, this idea of the unpaid work that actually powers the economy, powers families, powers communities, powers businesses. I was just thinking the other day, there's a group in New Zealand that has emerged to try to ban social media for children under 16. It's called Before 16, and I think something similar has happened in Australia. When I look at the website on who is behind this work, it is like 9 women and 1 guy. And when you look, why are dads not also involved in this? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's all, when you just look under it, there is all this work. And I totally agree. Like, you can't just say we value you. You have to pay us. Don't empower us. Pay us. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like,
Look, I think there is something really interesting, and, like, I see this as a real opportunity to really unlock what shared care looks like in homes and in households, because I think that, as I said, we haven't really had a playbook for that. And I remember years ago, back when I was an editor and a journalist at a website that is still running in Australia that I absolutely love, called Women's Gender. And it would have been probably 12 years ago that I interviewed an American author. She's a New York Times bestselling author, Bridget Schultz. And
oh, yeah.
I remember her saying to me, couples that want to do it differently have not been given a playbook, like, let alone the fact that the system's not there to support them. We are trying to do something new and different. And it's really hard to do something new and different without having a sort of intentional plan around that. And I think that's interesting. I've seen, like, I know the rise of Fair Play that Eve Rodsky has set up in America, but it's now, in our household, my husband and I have got the cards, and we've tried to work that out, because the idea behind these cards is to look at absolutely everything that is required in the running of your home household, whether you've got kids or not, but, like, what are all of the things that need to happen? And the cards give you the scope. There are certain categories, like, that you can completely ignore if you're not involved in community volunteering, or if but you get the set of cards that represent what you both agree needs to happen in any given year in your household. And you divvy it up. You don't just blindly hope and assume that it will be
It will all work out.
it'll all work out. But the thing I like about these cards is you're really coached through the process of how you can do it. And I'm not going to say that it's perfect in our household. It's not. It's a constant work in progress. But I think being really intentional about how are we dividing what happens in our house is so important. And I think it does go to the sort of, if you haven't got an alternative, I think people do just default to form, to what they've seen in their workplace or their family growing up. And that means, well, I don't have to get that involved in Christmas because I'll turn up on Christmas Day and there'll be these incredible presents for all the kids. And it's like, well, actually, if you want that sort of magic for your family, there's a whole lot of planning, shopping, wrapping, finding out what people want. Like, anyway, that's a bit of that's a slight tangent, but I just think there is an opportunity there where we can support parents to be more mindful and not in a, that sounds terrible, to give parents ways in which they can actively work with each other to share the load.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I don't think we are taught to have intentional conversations. In New Zealand, we do a 10-week course on how to give birth, and in breaking news, that's the easy bit. I can only say that because my youngest is 16, so it's long in the memory. But I also think that one of my big thoughts is that we've told women they can break into the boardroom, but we haven't told men they can break into the home. Society, when I say we. And I think fair play is great, and I recommend fair play to a lot of my clients, but intentional conversations, playbooks. I'm actually writing a working parent manual right now for that very reason, because I believe that the way through this system is conversations. It's talking about the hard stuff. It's figuring out, how will our family work, honey? Because I don't think we talk about it, and I think it drives conflict. And this is meant to be, you speak to old people, the best time of our lives.
Yeah. And look, I think it's so interesting that you said that about the sort of antenatal classes, because that is something that I say as well, that here in Australia, it's not a 10-week course, but it is now probably the vast majority of new parents will attend some form of birth education. And it might be a 2-day course. It might be, a few nights over a few weeks. Now, I think that's important because birth is an incredibly big physical and emotional experience. And so being prepared for that, and we know the evidence is really clear, giving that education does help. But isn't it funny that when everything goes well, your birth will represent a very, very tiny percentage of your journey as a parent, and yet you've done education for this bit, but the rest of it you've done no education for. And that's something that I think we need to change. And that's what you're saying. It is being more intentional about saying, how do we set parents up for this? It is the most radical life transformation that can ever occur. How can we support people and set them up for success? And let's look at, what does success mean? Success, in my view, means people being able to have honest and transparent conversations with each other about what they want and how they want it to feel.
Totally.
If we did that, we would really change a lot.
Totally. And look, I work with mums and dads because I think it's really important that I work with mums and dads. And, I believe in dads. Like, I believe it's a slot machine of pineapples when dads are active caregivers. I mean, better for mental health, better for relationships, better for kids, better for everything. And I think if we're working in this system that really doesn't value dads, that really makes them feel kind of invisible, that we need to support them. And I do think it's the conversations, it's helping them, it's empowering them to have really courageous conversations at work around, how might I work 4 days a week? Because actually that's really scary for dads.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's something that I share your passion and commitment to that, to empowering dads in sort of family life. I've often said, like, I don't think in global terms, Australian dads don't take very much parental leave at all. And that is because we don't have, very much paid leave available that's above the minimum wage. And for a lot of households, they just can't financially afford that. So you've got these sort of you've got community expectations, you've got policy settings that just create a scenario where not that many dads take very much parental leave. I don't think that's a reflection on men in Australia not wanting to. And it's that sort of, the profound benefit of when you actually support men as caregivers, like the benefits persist over the lives of the children, but also for the parents with the improved mental health for both mums and dads when that happens. But it's also what I was saying before about how ill prepared my husband and I both felt for parenthood. And then the only way you develop confidence and competence is by doing. And if we don't give men an opportunity to develop that confidence and competence, of course they're not going to have the confidence and competence, and then we're going to punish them for that later. It's about sort of saying, and that's why we are really supportive at the Parenthood of parents being able to share the care and having, I've done some work around this. Like if you look at globally, the evidence shows if you want dads to actually take parental leave, like extended parental leave, it has to be paid at above minimum wage rates, and it has to be offered on a use it or lose it basis. They are the two sort of biggest factors which determine will men actually take this. And why that is so important is because you give them the opportunity to actually be embedded in the caring journey, because until you do it, you have no idea what it takes. And you need that opportunity to learn and fail. And I think we've sort of had this crazy myth that somehow women are genetically blessed with this understanding and intuition, and some are, but some aren't. And lots of dads are great when they're given the opportunity to be great. But it's
Totally agree.
openly support that. And that's why I said, I think we sell dads short hugely. And I think it's really, people do it really flippantly without kind of thinking that. I always find it funny that we have been expected to sort of believe that, men are really capable and good at running big companies and countries. Like that's, their domain. And that's why, so few women have had those opportunities because men are just so good at it. But we've decided that, a man being able to pack a nappy bag is obviously like a big hurdle to overcome. And I'm like, I don't think we get to have both of those scenarios. If we're going to accept that men are skilled and competent, that does not just occur in the domain of running countries or companies. They can also be very competent at household management and packing a nappy bag and learning what snacks kids need. Like that's not rocket science. I think there's sort of this convenient brushing over of that to justify the status quo.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And my theory on that, well, there's a lot of reasons why that happens, but I don't think a lot of dads see work at home as work. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I remember one of my clients said to me once, I said, how does your family work and what does your partner do in the family? And she said to me, oh, well, the thing is, Emma, he's just not good at remembering. So, I just put things in his diary, and even then he doesn't forget them. He forgets them. And I said to her, what does he do for a job? She said, oh, he's a real estate agent. And I said, well, how does he remember to call clients back and like book viewings and turn up to the viewings? And she's like, ah. And I mean, I'm not taking the piss out of them, but I'm just saying, if you are a mum and you are partnered with a dad, want more from your partner, because I believe they have more.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah.
Final question.
Yes.
So I always give my podcast interviewees a magic wand at the end of the podcast. And it's like, if we think about the system, which we've spoken at length about, if you had a magic wand and you could use it to smash the motherhood penalty, which the Grattan Institute says is a 55% penalty on your salary over 10 years, what's the biggest lever? And it's very magic, this wand, so you can have whatever lever. What do you reckon the biggest lever is?
Oh, look, this one is tricky for me. I genuinely believe that it is the combination of having adequate and equitable paid parental leave that is shared between parents as the norm, and then having very high quality, totally affordable early childhood education and care for all children and families whenever they need it. And I think those two change the game for how parents can participate in the paid workforce. And I believe those two policy levers will help us get to my third dream of having workplaces that genuinely value caregiving among men and women. And it's not seen as this sort of impossible binary that you're either a parent or you're a contributor at work. You can actually be both, and you can actually do both really well and make a significant contribution. But I think until we change the paid parental leave settings so that both mums and dads are routinely taking extended paid parental leave, then we've got high quality early education that doesn't, you're not looking at it thinking, oh, we can't afford for you to work, so don't work. And then having workplaces where it is really normal and desirable for both mums and dads to potentially work part-time, to work, to be parents and workers.
Yeah.
I'm a bit greedy. With my wand, I'm just doing a couple of things, but they'd make a big difference.
They would. And when you talk about those things, I feel like without those first two policy levers, that third one you've got around workplaces genuinely valuing caregiving have got nothing to sit on. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that's the infrastructure you need for workplaces to genuinely be able to step up.
Yes.
And caregiving is not a niche thing that happens for 5 years. Like in breaking news, we're all going to be looking after our parents.
Yeah.
And I think workplaces need to get their heads around how we do this, because, that will be where 75% of our workforce are caregivers of some kind.
Yeah.
So,
that is the thing. Like, we are all humans who wear many hats. And I think that it's just wild to sort of discount that as if it is a niche scenario that'll only impact some people for a really brief period of time. It's all of us, always.
I love it. Ngā mihi nui, thank you so much, Georgie.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so much gold. I know so many listeners will have loved this conversation. I will put all the details of the Parenthood in the show notes. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Well, you are a delight. Thank you for having me.
This podcast was funded by Works for Everyone, a business that is dedicated to supporting working parents and to smashing the motherhood penalty. If this is also your jam, let's stay connected. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for us, Works for Everyone. And if you want more information on how we help businesses put a care wrap around their employees, check us out on worksforeveryone.co.nz. Or if none of these work for you, in the weekends you can find me, Emma McLean, the founder of Works for Everyone, in the queue at Pack and Save Royal Oak or Kmart St Luke's. Onwards!